I am so happy to have been invited in the name of Inside Out to share a little bit with you this afternoon. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit of a story. I have been known to tell this story over 2 hours, but I think we'll make it a little bit shorter. So as I was sitting there, I realized that I have been going in and out of prisons for half of my life. And I have learned a lot through those experiences, those many years of experiences. I started in 1985 and began teaching at Temple University in 1992. And when I was teaching, I began to take students into and out of facilities throughout the Philadelphia area and beyond. And then there was this moment in 1995 when I took a group of students to the state prison in Dallas, Pennsylvania, which is about 3 hours away from Philadelphia. So that was a life-changing moment for me, because what happened was we had this conversation with a group of men in the facility, and it was a conversation unlike anything I had ever experienced before. And at the end of it, one of the gentlemen who joined us, who is serving a life sentence, his name is Paul, he came up to me, introduced himself, I had never met him before, and said, this was really a kind of amazing conversation. Can you imagine doing this over a whole semester, like a class? And I thought it was just really an astonishing idea, and I told him that, and I also said I know that he wanted to do it, at Dallas with Temple students, and I said, I really don't think I could get students to come here, but I promised that I will think about it. Promised him that I would think about it, and indeed I did, and put together a class that began in the Philadelphia jails in 1997. I'm leaving out little parts of this story just for the sake of brevity. So in 1997, I took about 15 or so students to one of the facilities in the Philadelphia jail system. And I want you to kind of imagine what this looked like. So imagine a classroom where we're sitting in a circle, and around the circle are inside students and outside students. So it's 15 Temple students, 15 people who are incarcerated there, sitting alternately around the circle. That is how we do Inside Out. And it was a pretty amazing experience. It was a criminal justice class. That is what I teach. And so we focused on all sorts of issues of criminal justice, but so much more happened that day that was way beyond what I anticipated. The levels of learning that happened for everybody involved. It was not just learning about the issues, but also we all learned so much about ourselves, about other people, about the assumptions that we carry, about communication, working through conflict, all sorts of things. So this thing was way beyond what I had anticipated. And I loved it so much that I just kept doing it. To move a couple of years into the future, in 2002, the program got expanded to Graterford Prison. And when we were about to get it started there, I got a letter from a gentleman at Graterford. And I didn't know who this was, and so I was reading along, and he said, he had been talking with somebody there about getting the program started, and they were very excited that it was going to be coming to Graterford. And then he said, oh, by the way, you may remember me. I met you at Dallas. My name is Paul. So here this guy had been transferred from Dallas to Graterford. I had no idea because I hadn't kept in touch with him. Imagine his surprise that this thing, this idea that he had thrown out into the world had gotten legs. It was really quite something. The first class at Graterford is what set the program into the future. And this is why. The very first class at Graterford was so powerful that at the end of the semester, the students, inside and out, decided that they wanted to stay together into the future. And I said, oh, well, that's different. The semester's over. Usually we end. And they said, well, we want to keep meeting. We want to keep talking about these things. And so we got permission to meet every Wednesday night. That was in October of 2002. I can tell you that that group is still meeting weekly in 2019. That is some staying power. We called ourselves the think tank because we were able to think so well together. And one of the very important things that happened at the beginning of our process together was that somebody came up with the idea that we develop this into a national program, which I, of course, thought was a little ridiculous, but we were able to do it. And so we did a national replication. We had our first national training in July of 2004. And I can tell you that this past Saturday, I came back from our 65th international training. It was held in West Virginia. And why I say international is this. The program has grown tremendously over these 20-some years. We have more than 1,000 instructors who have been trained in our pedagogical approach throughout the United States and in 12 other countries. There have been, we've lost count, but something like 38,000 students, inside and outside students, who have taken part in Inside Out. In all sorts of disciplines, by the way. It's not just people who teach criminal justice. People who come to the trainings are from all sorts of disciplines. And just to add this to the mix, which I think is so interesting, I mentioned the think tank before, the group that's been meeting all these years. We now have 35 think tanks as part of our international network. It is way beyond anything that I certainly could have ever imagined. And it's interesting, one time somebody said to me, wow, Lori, this must be like a dream come true. My response was, no, it's really not, because I never dreamed it. Which is why it's such a wonderful and beautiful thing. I am so humbled to see where this program has gone over the years and the thousands of people who have gotten involved in it. So I want to say a few things about what people get out of this program. For the outside students, let me talk about it in three ways. There are three things that we do through Inside Out. And by the way, it's called the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program. One thing is that we bring outside people into prison. And why that's important is, one of the folks on the inside once said to us, you know, that wall isn't there just to keep me in, but to keep you out. And, you know, it is very clear to me, as a person who never thought about prisons until I started to go in, by the way, it's very clear to me that we as a society will only allow this level of mass incarceration to continue if we don't know what's happening. And so it is immensely important that we as people on the outside go inside and see what these places are like, see who's in there, see who's not in there, by the way, and see, kind of what's going on the inside. So that's one thing. It is taking outside people in. A second thing is taking college courses into prison. Thankfully, there are quite a number of schools throughout the United States that are doing that increasingly. And that is very, very exciting. Because as we know, in the middle of the 90s, that fell apart because Pell Grants were no longer allowed for people who were incarcerated. One of the differences, I guess, that I want to point out about Inside Out is that it is a college course, absolutely. But in some ways, it's more than that. there is a depth to what happens in this learning, which I referred to before, that is so almost mysterious. I know that's a strange word to use, but people come out of this experience, both inside and outside students, talking consistently about how this has changed their lives, how transformative it is, etc. I mean, I've been involved in this from the beginning. I don't fully understand why that is, but I know in my gut that it is real, absolutely real. It is one of the best examples, I think, of what we might call community-based learning, civic engagement, all of that. And one of the other things about the differences between inside-out classes and other classes through other programs is this, that generally, how can I say this? Other programs are, I want to figure out how to explain this. We are open to all sorts of people from the inside being involved in inside-out classes, even if they don't have yet a GED or a high school diploma. And why that's important is that for some people who maybe abandoned education back in their past, and frankly, to my understanding of it, it's more that the educational system abandoned them in many cases, but their history of education sometimes is just horrendous. And so for them to come into this educational setting and have a really, really positive experience, it puts people on a totally new trajectory in terms of seeing themselves differently, finding their voice, seeing actually, or getting in touch with a sense of leadership that is there. I mean, these things are latent inside of lots and lots of folks who are in prison. And so, while we are not a reentry program per se, I can say that there is a lot that happens for the men and women on the inside who go through these classes. The third thing that we do is dialogue across difference. And it's not just the simplistic difference of half of the group are incarcerated and half are not. That's one very obvious difference, but there are so many levels of difference between us, just like there would be many, many kinds of differences between any ones in this room. And how important, especially these days, dialogue, real dialogue, within a relatively safe space, how important that is to move beyond being limited by the differences that we perceive in one another. One of the other things that happens in the classroom to especially focus on the inside students is there's a normalization that occurs. I mean, it's one thing, and I've talked to lots of folks on the inside who have taken, regular college classes. There is something that happens with Inside Out that adds a dimension of what I will call normalization. They're having classes with what some of the folks on the inside call, quote unquote, real college students. There is something about that makes a big difference for people. And there is a socialization that occurs. I mean, people talk about, wow, I just had class last night and at Phoenix, which is a maximum security facility about an hour away from here. They talk about how different it is, how they see themselves differently, in a sense, through the eyes of the outside students. And for people, especially who have been incarcerated for a long time, and maybe people who aren't getting visits from outside people, that is very, very important. There's this sense of, what they get a sense of is how maybe some people on the outside may look at them in a more positive way than they think. One of the things that I'd like to share with you is what happens in that circle. Here's how I'll explain it. At the end of the course, it's always a little bit of a downer because the group has really bonded, and we have very strict parameters that people are not in touch with each other outside of that classroom. And so for the first couple of semesters that I taught, I figured that the sadness or the grieving that was happening was because of the loss of the relationships. Actually, I came to a different and maybe a deeper realization sometime later, that the grieving that's happening is the grieving of the space that was created in that circle. It's a space where, and again, I can't exactly explain why this is, but a space where people invite the best out of each other. We all want that. We all want to invite the best out of each other and to have the best in ourselves invited out. I think that what's a little sad about this is that in our world, we don't have spaces like that. So what happens is people go through a semester having had that experience where their voice meant something, where there wasn't judgment hanging over them all the time, and then they lose it. So what I always say at the end of a semester is, you know, it would not be fair to this experience to keep it as just a nice memory. That what we need to do as individuals, whether we're in prison or out of prison, is create spaces like this in the world. Create spaces where people can come together, even just small groups, and invite the best out of each other. So that is one realization that I've come to. Here's another realization from all of the years of going in and out of prison that I've come to. So I have spent time with people who are in for homicide, people who are in drug cartels, all sorts of people. And when I have met people, I have met a different dimension of them. That is not to deny what people have done. I'm not naive. I'm not a flaming liberal and all of that. What I came to a realization one time about myself, which is that I think I know myself well enough to know that if in the wrong or right situation, or given the wrong or right situation, I could kill somebody, and I can do wonderful things, and everything in between. It's what I think of as a continuum of potentiality. And if that's true for me, as I believe it is, and I believe it's true for you, it's also true for people inside prison. And so when we invite that other dimension out in people, it makes a powerful difference in their lives. This is something that I wrote many, many years ago, and I really like it, and I'd like to share it with you. And it kind of summarizes in a somewhat poetic way about the Inside Out program. So what is this thing called Inside Out? On one level, it's a class, though not an ordinary one. In this class, roles are intermingled. Everyone is the teacher, everyone is the learner. The process of investigation and discovery is a communal enterprise. We explore together, we grapple together, we create new knowledge together, and we challenge one another to go deeper, always deeper. But there's more. In a most unlikely setting, that is prison, Inside Out provides a space of liberation, a place in which each person is recognized and celebrated for the unique contribution that he or she brings to the whole. In the face of the many forms of imprisonment that we bear in our lives, some internal, some external, this experience offers an intimation of freedom. In this shared space, we can be who we are, say what we know, and call forth the best in each other. And in our wider social reality, Inside Out is about walls, some of our own making, some made by others. Some walls are made of bricks, but all are held in place by the mortar of fear and ignorance. We fear what we don't know in others, in the world, even in ourselves. We build walls thinking we can keep ourselves safe from whatever we imagine is threatening us. But in this construction is our destruction. So, Inside Out moves through the walls. It's an exchange, an engagement between and among people who live on both sides of the prison wall. And it is through this exchange, realized through the crucible of dialogue, that the walls around us and within us begin to crumble. We are then brought closer to our truest nature. The hope is that in time, through this exchange, these walls will become increasingly permeable and eventually extinct, one idea, one person, one brick at a time. Thank you.
So Lori said something that resonated real loud to my spirit. She said she never thought about jail until she went in it. Neither did I. So I want to start with a little bit about myself. I want to transition and provide some context about, I'll say, reentry and what it means to a university operating in that space. I want to close out with what I believe is Temple's impact around reentry. So who am I? Malenka Karenda said, who am I? Am I the person that I think and say that I am? Am I the best person that I can be? So that's been my mantra for a very long time. The heart. My daddy Moon, my brother Amani, my sister Anaya, brother-in-laws Mac X, Aleem Nasir, nephews Jihad, my son, Little Reds, and myself sadly represent 3 generations of one family that have been convicted, sentenced, and incarcerated in America's jails. January 29th this year will mark my 33rd year anniversary since release from federal detention. That day, I began my journey traveling reentry's road to redemption. Prior to and along this journey, I've been known by many names. Little Billy Hart. In my formative years, Do Dirty Reds. I'll say that again, Do Dirty Reds. 35336-066. Jabalia Sabirin, and today I introduce myself to you as William E. Hart, the Associate Director for the Office of Community Relations, Temple University. Temple University. So I was born and raised down the bottom, Mantua's Black Bottom. Home for me has always been defined by generational poverty, broken and failing public education system, crime and chronic unemployment, high crime and high chronic unemployment, and the dysfunction that comes from broken and blighted homes in redline communities and dreams that have always been deferred. So, like so many others, I can find solace in knowing that the inner city blues have a gravitational pull, predisposing people like myself towards crime and the lifetime consequences of being a convicted felon. But I got to tell you, that for me was not the case. I take full responsibility for the choices and continue to embrace the consequences, the collateral consequences of my felony conviction. The issues and concerns of previously incarcerated men, especially men of color, were very much the same, but I got to say different for me. No different than Senator Harris when she threw that right hook at Joe Biden talking about that little girl that was bused. You guys remember that, don't you? Well, I was that little boy that was on that bus. So desegregation offered me a real unique early learning opportunity where I began to embrace that I could assimilate, and I could also embrace that I became self-assured that I can compete with anybody at any given time. That propelled me to graduate from those of us from Philadelphia Central High School, 233, Temple's Fox School of Business with a 3.1 GPA. I attained the rank of captain, United States Army Corps of Engineers, before transitioning to federal detention to become one of the best buff, strip, and wax persons that they had in that facility. My unlikely travels from ex-offender to what became the executive director of the reentry initiatives in Philadelphia was just that, unlikely. And I have to say, I own my biases, and by that I mean, when I was interviewed by Mayor Nutter, I shared with him some thoughts about what I thought about repayment of societal debt, what I thought about second chances, and what I thought about citizenships. So, and I'll tell you why. That repayment of societal debts, well, that 10 years that I was sentenced to and the time that I spent in jail, didn't spend one dime. That $40,000 a year it cost to incarcerate me, it's never got paid back. But as I would tell my guys that came through the reentry doors, that incarceration, that was the penalty phase. Second chance. I am one that does not believe anybody deserves a second chance. Don't believe it, can't own it. And I'll say, here's what's fun. Riddle me this, Batman. This is my 5th conviction, but I do believe I deserve a second chance. That never made sense to me. Second chances aren't deserved, they're earned. And I'll say, lastly, citizenship. Little side story. We were in conference with the mayor, chief of staff, and we were trying to determine what would we call folks returning from incarceration. So we had a laundry list of things, ex-offender. And Mayor Nutter, I'll never forget, said, he says, ex-offender is like somebody that was just made it through cancer. They're not ex-cancer survivors, so threw that one out. I liked formerly incarcerated, but the mayor said, no, we want to call our guys returning citizens, which I bucked. I did not accept the fact that because citizenship is defined as anyone that's born in America or born from a parent in America, that they in turn are citizens. What the definition of citizenship left out was that community personal responsibility. Returning home from jail does not make me a returning citizen. I have to embrace the responsibilities. I need to take care of my family. I need to be an integral part of the communities I live in. And most importantly, I am not breaking the law ever again. So, that said, I was really humbled with the opportunity to serve as the Executive Director for Reentry for RISE. I've served 11,000 county, state, and federal offenders. Proudly, 1,700 we moved into employment, a 3.6% recidivism rate for the 2,500 guys that were actively enrolled with us. To better understand Temple University's reentry relationships, I believe it's just helpful to provide some context. 3 areas: demographics, Part 1 crimes, and county releases. So on your tables, you have my slides, and it has the detail that I'm going to talk about. So demographics, Philadelphia, 1.56 million residents. We're Pennsylvania's largest city. We're the 2nd largest city on the East Coast, and we have the 5th largest population in the United States. Our population has been growing for the past 7 years. Okay, so I want to gloss over my slides because the detail kind of speaks for itself. So slide number 3 talks about demographics. Our catchment area. And the catchment area for Temple University are the 8 zip codes that surround our university campus and our health science system. We were very proactive in understanding that there's this symbiotic relationship between Temple and what happens in the streets. As Temple goes, so does North Philadelphia. Population, so demographics, and one of the data points that jumped out for me recently was I looked at population density. In the city of Philadelphia, there's approximately about 11,000 people per square city mile. In our catchment area, North Philadelphia, which you see circled in the red, 33,000 people per square mile. We, leadership of the senior administrators, decided that we need to target the folks living in our zip codes. So we have a high impact area, which is the zip codes immediately around where we do our business, and then further out. I think it goes without saying, Temple University is a landlocked academic institution. We're in North Central Philadelphia, predominantly black and Latino. And as my mentor would say, is you can't unring a bell. Gentrification is that bell that's already rung. So we have a growing white population as you travel up North Broad Street towards Center Campus. Education and poverty. So one of the things that resonated really, really loud for me, and I understood to be clear, is that education is probably the keys that unlocks a lot of doors of golden opportunity. So I would push that amongst the clients we serve. But disheartening is anyone that walked through my doors at RISE, we TABE assessed the adult basic education assessments, and the average reading level for the clients that we serve was a 5th grade reading level. The demographics also suggest that 40% of the ex-offenders returning to our communities have no high school diploma. I think that to be very significant as we talk about reentry and we talk about recidivism. Education, poverty. I'm on the right slide. I got it. So poverty, just for definition's sake, poverty is defined as a family of 4 that has a household income of $25,000 a year. Philadelphia happens to be the largest, poorest big city in America right now. Philadelphia has a 25% poverty rate. In our catchment area highlighted, the poverty rate is 54%. 54% of the residents in North Central Philadelphia are living in poverty. Median income citywide, approximately $42,000. In our catchment area, North Philadelphia, it's $25,000 for a family of 4. Catchment area, part 1 crimes. Felt compelled to share this data. You may or you may not know this. America makes up 10% of the world's population, yet we incarcerate 25% of the world's prisoners. We are the largest incarcerator of citizens in the world right now. 77 million Americans, which equals 1 out of 3, have criminal convictions. 1980, across the nation, in our county, our state, and our federal jails, 260,000 inmates. Fast forward, 2019, 2.2 million Americans are incarcerated in our jails and prisons across the country. What does that mean? What's the significance of all that? 130 million people have family members that have criminal convictions. And what it means to folks like the bean counters, that's about $80 billion spent every year to incarcerate American citizens. Just want you to process that. Part 1 crimes. What you see across the board, homicide, rape, robbery, ag assault, burglary, theft, stolen auto, they're the most violent crimes that we document in terms of statistics. On the right-hand side are the 8 zip codes in our catchment areas. So as you can see, there's a significant impact, Part 1 crimes in the residents that live in our neighborhoods. County releases. I thought this was significant just to add some more context to the conversation that we're having. Every year coming back to Philadelphia from federal detentions, about 1,500 guys. And I say that generically because our female population is one of the fastest growing in the nation. Every year coming back to Philadelphia from state detention, about 5,000 guys. But I have to say this a little differently. Every year coming out of the 8 jails, our county jails up on State Road, it's about 30,000 releases. So 30,000 releases sounds something like this. I get locked up, I get bailed out, but you know I'm a superstar. I'll be back in jail shortly. So each time I'm released, not a unique person, but it's unique in terms of releases. So that said, every year coming back to Philadelphia, there are about, my guesstimate, about 30,000 returning citizens, ex-offenders, formerly incarcerated people. What that would suggest to me is that we have a reentry population in Philadelphia that's between 300 to 400,000 of our 1.5 1.56 million residents. It's significant. Temple has been very strategic in developing community partnerships. That's how we do our business. If you can visualize a bicycle wheel, Temple is that central spoke in the wheel that we provide direct services, but those services that we can't provide or indirect services, we partner with our community organizations. So our faith-based, our residential, our legislators, and I'm going to circle back to our legislators in a minute, our RCOs, our regional community organizations, our nonprofits, and I save schools for last. Temple has been very, very proactive in working with our schools, in particular our elementary schools, because we realize that one of the metrics that's used nationally to determine how many jail cells will be built in the future is based on 4th grade reading levels. And if, in fact, we can have an impact on early learning, it will change the trajectory of young folks for a very, very long time. Our legislators. Temple has been very, very active in cultivating relationships with our electeds because our electeds, in particular at the state level, are setting policy. We've just recently hosted a reentry summit where we brought our legislators in and our formerly incarcerated folks so we can have that discourse and that dialogue and talk in particular about the lifetime sentences dying in jail and how we're trying to change that. Schools I mentioned, very, very, very important that we understand the significance of early childhood learning, early childhood education. Our nonprofits, one of the areas that we as an academic institution, no different than what you guys do, our business is education. It's educating the students that we serve. So we partner with a number of nonprofit organizations to deal with what I call my guys' demons. They're dope demons, they're anger management demons, you can't tell me nothing demons. So we can provide those resources that hopefully will keep our guys back on the street. I want to close with this. Small story. So I'm the executive director for reentry in Philadelphia. Walking through my door on any given day, there's about 100 people. This one particular guy, a friend, and I'll call him a friend, he came home from federal detention. He had been away for about 10 years. I knew him from the world, and he was the kind of guy that I kind of admired because he really handled his business. But this is what happened when the feds come. They come 4 in the morning. They kick the door down, but they come not only with search warrants, but they also come with forfeiture warrants. So they took everything that he owned, cars, houses, money. So he walks through my door. He says to me, "Hey, Bill, you ain't got to worry about me. Cognitively, I'm okay." He says, "I just need to work. I need to work." So at that time, we had relationships with multiple employers, but this one in particular, AC Lennon's. They were hiring 50 of my guys at a time, so we really, really cultivated the relationship. But they were paying $7.50 an hour. $7.50 an hour, hardly a sustainable, livable wage. But with that said, hook the brother up. He worked. He worked and he worked and he worked. I didn't see him for a year. I bumped into him on the street and he cornered me. And he said, "Bill, expletive deleted. That job that you got me," he said, "You know what? I'm still there." So he kind of caught my attention. He started to talk about it. He says, "Dig this." He says, "You know, when I came home, they took everything I owned." He says, "I returned home to my mama's house. I sleep on the couch." He says, "But that $7.50, it ain't no money, but what it does for me, it means that I don't have to ask my mama for car fare." He says, "What it means to me, and more importantly, is my little shorty, my son, sees his daddy go to work every day. His daddy go to work." And for him, that meant that he was going to break that chain of generational incarceration. Super significant. So with that story, I want to suggest a couple things. For those of us that work in the reentry space, there's 10% of the guys that will come through your door, you will never have to do anything with them. That was me. There's another 10%, incorrigible. It ain't nothing you can do with them. But it's that 80% in the middle that if, in fact, you target their resources and they want it, we can change this dilemma, that dynamics. I got to say to you, family relationships, community support organizations that have resources that the university can support to make them viable, and employment will change the reentry dilemma in the United States. Just want to thank you for allowing me to share.
Hi, I was curious around for the Inside Out programs, to what extent have those been shared within correctional facilities that are specifically focused on women?
Who's speaking?
Sanae. Oh. Sorry, I didn't know that was important to you. Yeah, I'm just curious about how many women's prisons actually get access to the Inside Out programs you're talking about.
Since women's prisons are approximately 10% of the prisons that exist, I would say, I don't know whether we have our programs in the same proportion, but we certainly have classes in women's prisons for sure, throughout our whole network, absolutely.
I'm a Temple alum, so I always have questions, Temple made all day. But I never get Johns Hopkins. But I had a question around the Office of Community Relations. And I'm curious if you were, let's just say we were to rewind and go back 50 years or 100 years, and you had to decide just one particular activity to focus on, because I'm looking through your resource guide here, and there are many different resources that Temple is aligning with and working with. What would you focus on? And the other question I have is how do you own maybe your historical relationship with the community, and how has that changed over the last, since the creation of this office? How has it gotten better? And have you had some like healing circles or conversations around the role Temple has played in North Philly?
So, to answer the first question, the one thing that we at Temple would focus on, at least wise in my opinion, it would be employment. Employment. I have to believe that employment is probably the most valued reentry resource or tool that we can use. Because if we can get folk working, livable wages, the need to do some of the things that we do outside of that disappear. Secondly, the relationship with our community, and we talk about this internally a lot. Oftentimes, and this is just me speaking, this is my opinion, I can't speak for the university, but we need to define what community really is. Oftentimes we lump it all in one big umbrella, but we have a faith-based community. They have their own agenda, their own things they want to get done. We have a business and merchant community that is really excelling and have expedited the transformation of what's happening in North Philadelphia. And then we have our residential community. As we do our research, and I'll say in particular in the neighborhoods around the university, the demographics are changing. The generational residents that have been there for multiple years, those numbers are disappearing. So it's a different dynamic now. Hopefully I've answered your question.
Hey, Lori. Hey, Bill. Jen from Drexel. Lori and I go way back, so glad to see you here. Bill, I guess this is a question for you, but Lori, if you got any input. At Drexel, we're thinking a lot about workforce development, and I was really struck by your story and that you're at Temple and that you grew up in the Black Bottom, which is the neighborhood immediately adjacent to Drexel. Yeah. So my question to you is really around workforce development for higher eds. Like, what role do we play in that for folks who are returning citizens, not only for workforce pipelines in our communities, but at our institutions?
So let me try to answer it this way. Several years ago, before I left to work for the city government, the president at the time, it was David Adamati, had decided that we really need to be proactive in our employment outreach in terms of readiness, job skills, training development, but also the stewardship of bringing folk into university. So we developed a high impact area, and they're the actual streets that Temple does its business in, and further out is our target zip code areas. We flagged every application that came in through our system with the H&T, so there was a lot of attention given to these applicants. And I have to say, in all candor, my vice president at the time was Harry Young, and we talked about folks coming through our doors with criminal convictions, and Harry said to me, and I'll never forget, was that what they did in the past is over, The only question I ask of you when you hire, are they qualified to do the work? So just based on qualifications and work ethics is how we address that issue.
I don't know which of you want to address this, but I'm really curious. Like how transparent is Temple about the practice you just mentioned, the prison inside-outside program, meaning like the parents' perspective of their children being involved in this? Like how do they separate? What do they say? I'm just thinking about us, and we get parents who think things about what we do inside of a college classroom.
So parents' reactions. Is that what you're talking about? Okay, so thankfully I don't hear from many parents. However, it's interesting because from time to time, some of the, what I'll call outside students, that's the Temple students, I'll ask them and I'll say, so what's your family's reaction to your doing this? And there's often a lot of fear involved, but then once the students go through the experience, the first couple of weeks, they keep telling their families about what's happening, that there's no reason to be anxious about it, et cetera. And what's also interesting is the issue of race and racism comes up. And so sometimes, I remember recently a student talking about that her dad is kind of on the racist side, and so, and she is talking about this class where the inside students are predominantly men of color, and he was really not happy with that. And then again, over time, in her talking, she got him to see things in a different way.
Thanks for the presentation. I just had a couple questions on the Inside Out program, and I was just wondering if if the students on the inside, do they have the opportunity to earn college credit as they take the classes? And then also just wondering if you work with the same facilities over time so that, someone at a facility over a course of time could take 3 or 4 classes? Okay.
Second part of your question.
Okay,
Real
sorry.
close.
One,
College credits.
Yeah, college credit. And then secondly, can folks on the inside take multiple classes if you're returning to the same facility?
So both questions, can people hear me? Yeah. All right. Both questions depend on the academic institution involved. Throughout our network, I'd say about 50% or so of the classes that are offered provide credit some way or another. People have worked out all sorts of creative ways to do this, making credit available for the inside students. Whether people can take more than one class. Again, that depends. So for example, where I teach, currently I am the only person who teaches there, and I teach the same class, each year. And so I want people, given that the population of that facility is something like 3,000 men, and it's 15 people at a time, I want people to be able to have the opportunity. So we don't have people repeat. But sometimes that happens, especially if the subject of the class is different in a particular institution.